Hello BookTube, and my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Bookers and Books. In my previous video, I talked about my favorite nonfiction reads of 2023. So logically, I should be talking about my least favorite nonfiction reads of 2023. However, there's not a lot of them. Actually, there's not a single one of them that I hated. However, there's one that drove me bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. I was shouting at the book when I was reading it, and I was writing, not in the book because it was the library loan, but on post-its that I was sticking, and I was sticking post-its, and I took a lot of notes, and I wanted to film a video, and actually I filmed several of them, but I never posted a single one of them because I ended up just shouting at the camera. It was just chaos. I was so pumped up. Even several months after having read the book. I read the book in May, perhaps, and I remember trying to film a review of it in August, and I still could not. It was just, I was not making any sense. I was just rambling and shouting at the camera. So now it's been really several months. It's going on a year, or it's not quite. It's been like 8 months, 10 months. I think I can make that review calmly. I think that maybe not. Maybe it's going to end up being a rant. Maybe I'm going to swear. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to go. Because I haven't really structured my thoughts. Yeah, perhaps I should. Perhaps I should have made a list of talking points and just stick to those. But I'm going to wing it, just to go as I remember the book and trying to talk about the things that are staying with me 8 months later. Though I have a few notes. I have looked at a few notes. So the book in question is Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. And the book is about what should we do with the artists that we love who have disappointed us by their conduct. So artists who are alleged to have, or who have been proved to have, raped someone, killed someone, being domestic abusers, having done something terrible. It started with the idea, or something, a conversation that she heard, that somebody asked, am I still allowed to listen to the music of, I don't remember who it was, let's say Michael Jackson. Am I still allowed to listen to Michael Jackson because he's alleged to have done acts of pedophilia? And he's not a very savory character. So should we still be listening to that? And Dederer wanted to have an answer to that. Is there some sort of formula that enables us to decide, yes, this artist can be listened to or can be enjoyed. No, this one should be put aside. Now, of course, there's no such formula. There are no such criterias. So she comes quickly to that point. She doesn't spend a lot of time on that. It's rather obvious that there's no such formula. However, she wanted to talk about the experience of the crowd when consuming the works of art, when experiencing the works of art. How do we feel when we are experiencing the art of artists who are dubious, who are monsters, in her words? So she wanted to write the biography of the audience. So that's the basis of the book. Now, I want to start with a little parenthesis. So this is not about judging the quality of a work of art based on the identity of the author. So we are not judging whether, I don't know, let's say in a book, if a gay character is credible depending on whether the author is gay or not. So that's not the issue. We are not trying to judge, so it's not about the quality of the work, depending on the identity of the author. Because of course, one of the first things that Claire Dederer does is to talk about some professor of, I don't remember if it was literature or cinema, and talking about her discomfort about, I think it was cinema, and she was talking about Woody Allen, being uncomfortable watching Woody Allen movies, and particularly in one of them, was it in Manhattan or in, or perhaps in Annie Hall. Anyway, his character is being very, very proud of having sex with a teenager. And we all know that Woody Allen ended up marrying the adoptive daughter of his own wife, who was a teenager at the time. And there's something icky about that. He was supposed to be a father figure, and he ends up sleeping with her and marrying her, I suppose. Well, not I suppose, he did marry her, but to me, the wedding vows don't necessarily make it any better. So there's something uncomfortable. So she was talking about that to this professor, and the professor said, you must separate the art from the artist. You must. And Dederer reacts in the way saying, well, art is supposed to make us feel things, and now the authorities are telling us that that feeling of ugh is not allowed. So she finds this a little bit hypocritical, and I have to agree with her. So that's not the bit that drove me bonkers. Okay, so I suppose that for many of you just already there, that's going to drive you bonkers, because if you believe that you must separate art from the artist, that's it. The premise of the book is just not for you. Just stay away from that book. But for me, I agree that it's not possible to separate the art from the artist most of the time. Dederer makes the point that because we know so much about the artist, and because we know we bring ourselves to the work of art. So whether it's a painting, it's a movie, it's a book, you bring your entire life to experiencing that work of art. And because we know so much about the artist, they also bring their entire lives to that. So the experiencing of works of art is a meeting of two biographies. And I think that is an excellent point. A parenthesis. I don't think it's true that we actually separate art from artist. If you think about it, if it was true, there would be no such thing as a forgery in painting or in sculpture. If we didn't care who the artist was, there would be no such thing as a forgery. And forgery exists, so we do care who the artist is. So if the identity of the artist, so this particular painting must have been painted by the hand of this human being, then the behavior and the life of this human being should count. Why shouldn't it count? Also, let's say that you are a book critic and you are reviewing a novel. You will not react the same way if it's a debut novel or if it's the 20th novel of the person. If the person has already been praised for this particular aspect of their writing or has not. So you don't separate the author from the work. Perhaps you separate the private life, but then again, if it's a debut, it's a big part of their private life. Also, I don't think it's entirely possible. Anyway, I would probably lose too much time on these little details that are not in the book. It's just my opinion. I don't think it's true that we always separate art from artist. It just doesn't happen. We may think that we do, but I think in most cases we just don't. So we might as well take that into account, that we don't always separate art from artist, and that it's okay to be influenced by the artist's lives. And that brings us to another good point that she makes. She talks about the stain effect, that because an artist has behaved badly, it stains our experience. We just cannot get rid of that. Take the example of Michael Jackson, who is alleged to have done pedophile acts. It's very, very hard to listen to his music and just not think about that. When you think Michael Jackson, do you really think about the music first, or do you think about the allegations first? It brings a whole bunch of connotations, and it stains the work. It's very hard to judge everything, to not have the work tainted by the behavior of the artist. She talks about various artists, mainly who have committed sexual misbehaviors. Woody Allen, Bill Cosby, Michael Jackson, Picasso, Hemingway, though Hemingway is more like being a terrible husband, driving a lot of people around him to suicide, being an alcoholic, and anyway, having a dubious personal, not a dubious, but having a sort of bullying personality. But anyway, so that's a point that she makes that I think is very, very good. And now she talks about a lot of things. Another point that I thought was excellent. She was talking about Stephen Fry, who was talking about Wagner. Stephen Fry is Jewish, and Wagner is a rabid anti-Semite. It's awful. He's not even in the average of the 19th century. He goes out of his way to talk against Jews. It's awful. It's really awful. And she talks about, here I am talking about Dederer, talking about Stephen Fry, talking about Wagner. She talks about Stephen Fry, who would like to go back in time to talk to Wagner and tell to him, you know, you could be considered the best composer in the world, but the problem is your anti-Semitic writings, they make you so unpalatable that in some places you cannot be played at all. It taints your legacy. And Dederer sort of thinks that Fry is deluding himself because we think that we know better now. But guess what? In the 19th century, they also thought they knew better. So it doesn't really, the idea that now we know better doesn't really stand, because back then they also thought they knew better. And chances are that if Fry had this conversation with Wagner, Wagner would just laugh at him and tell him, well, of course you think that, you're a Jew. And yeah, and the other point that she makes with that is that often a lot of people, when they think about the Second World War and they think about anti-Semitism, and they are thinking, if I had been living back then, I would have said something. And she compares people denouncing the misbehaviors of artists and other people in life as being just that. It's not cancel culture. It's somebody saying to someone else, your behavior is unacceptable. It is actually doing something about that. Whether it's anti-Semitism or sexism or racism, you are doing something about that. You are saying to someone, your behavior is unacceptable. And I thought that was an excellent point. It's not canceling someone. It's just telling them that their behavior should have consequences. And I thought that was an excellent point. So for a book that drove me crazy, so far it's doing very, very well. And that is when things start to unravel a little bit. So that's the beginning of the book. She makes several points with which I agree. And I was thinking, yes, absolutely, good point. I agree. And then she moves on. She wanted not just to talk about men, she wanted to talk about women artists too, because some of them misbehave. And then she says that anytime that she reads or thinks about artists who misbehaves, it's always about motherhood. It's about bad mothers. And then I was thinking, well, she hasn't looked very far. And I was thinking of two writers who actually have committed. In one case, it's proved, and in the other case, it's just allegations. One of them is Anne Perry, the author of Mysteries. She has killed someone. She has been convicted of murder when she was a teenager, and she went through the sentence through the youth rehabilitation system, whatever that is. I think she was from New Zealand, and then she moved to Britain or the US or both, I don't remember, and she lived a normal life. She was rehabilitated and she wrote murder mysteries, which can be a bit uncomfortable when you think that the author of a murder mystery has actually killed someone. When I learned that, I felt uncomfortable. And another one is the author of The Mist of Avalon. I forget the name. I think Zinnan. Her daughter accused her of horrible misbehavior of sexual nature. It's really horrible. So it goes beyond being a bad mother. We are going into alleged crimes. And when Dederer says that the only thing that you can find about women is that they're being bad mother, I thought, well, you haven't done a lot of research, have you? So that's the first thing that did not go well with me. But anyway, I put it aside and I figured, okay, she's talking about artists that she knows. Okay, fine, fair enough. And then she kept talking about that, about bad mothers. And she spent a lot of time on that. At some point, she talks about that when she was a teenager, whenever a character in the book got pregnant, she would lose interest because for her, pregnancy was sort of the end of a character, the end of possibilities. And suddenly the character was not interesting anymore. And I was thinking, for me, it's motherhood. When people dwell too much on motherhood, it starts to be not interesting anymore. And by that point, she had been talking about motherhood for 40 pages. So I was thinking, yeah, I think you're working out your guilt. You must feel guilty about it. And just a few pages later, she talks about her guilt, that when she was writing that book, she was at a retreat and she was away from her children for about 3 weeks, I think. Was it 3 weeks or 3 months? I think it was just 3 weeks. And her children were teenagers. And I was thinking, really? Really? You feel guilty because you're spending 3 weeks away from your teenagers? They're going to be just fine. And I was starting to think that she was putting motherhood on some sort of puritanical pedestal, like the sanctifying of motherhood. And I really didn't really like that. And then she continues. She talks about Valerie Solanas. I did not know who she was. And she is in the same chapter as Sylvia Plath. So she does that a few times, coupling a couple of artists together to just make a comparison. And she talks about Valerie Solanas. I didn't know who she was, so I Googled her. And she is not an artist. I'm sorry, she is not. She is a woman who had a very difficult life. She wrote a feminist manifesto, but a very violent feminist manifesto, basically calling for the annihilation of men. And one day she took a gun and she went to, 1 gun or 2 guns. Anyway, she took weapons and she went to the workshop of Andy Warhol, and she tried to kill him, but she just ended up shooting at an assistant and someone else. I think she shot a couple of people, and she ended up in jail for that. And by then I was insulted that she was being called an artist. It's not because you write a manifesto and you kill someone or try to kill someone that you become an artist, because any mass shooter that posts something on Facebook and then goes to kill people, that does not make them artists. Even if their manifesto is then reprinted and somehow gets some sort of iconic status, some sort of iconic status, it just doesn't count as an artist. So I was a bit frustrated to see her in the same chapter as Sylvia Plath. And then she wrote one word. She says, listen, I understand that comparing Solanas to Sylvia Plath is blah, blah, blah. It's the listen that drove me. Again, it was just, no. I've been listening to you for 150 pages or 180 pages. I don't remember exactly at what point it was. But I have been listening. This is a book. There's nothing else I can do except listen. And we all know that in a conversation, whenever the other person says, listen, it means shut up and let me talk. So by then, I was not happy at all. And then she continues talking about Sylvia Plath and her suicide. And she basically reduces the suicide of Sylvia Plath to her being a victim of patriarchy and being a bit of a victim of her husband who cheated on her or something like that. And after having read the big biography, Red Comet, of, who wrote that? I forgot. Is it Heather Clark? Anyway, Red Comet, the biography of Sylvia Plath, I know that it was a much more complex story than that. Sylvia Plath first tried to commit suicide when she was still a teenager. So, victim of patriarchy? I'm not sure. There's a lot of mental illness going on with that. So, that was a little bit insulting. So then she goes on, and then she sort of shifts a bit her focus, and at some point she starts to talk about alcoholism. So she gives the example of Raymond Carver, who was a terrible, terrible husband because he was an alcoholic, he was beating his wife, and that makes him a monster. But then he got sober, and with his second wife, he was very, very nice. And that is where she reveals that she is herself an alcoholic, and that she feels some sort of sympathy for these monsters. And by then I thought, okay, she's working out her guilt. That is it. She's working out her guilt. And then not long after talking about Raymond Carver is the conclusion, and the conclusion is, I think I wrote it down. Well, I wrote a little part of it down. She writes that we cannot really help who we love. So love is not reliant on judgment, but on a decision to set judgment aside. Love is anarchy. Love is chaos. We don't love the deserving. We love flawed and imperfect human beings in an emotional logic that belongs to an entirely different weather system than the chilly climate of reason. So we love who we love. Okay, fine. It's true. It's also shit. It's true, we love who we love, but as a conclusion, it is utter shit. That's where we started. We love who we love. The question is, what do you do with your feelings? Because let's say in real life that you're in love with, I don't know, your husband, your best friend's husband. What do you do with that? What do you do with your feelings? Do you act on them, or you just put them aside? You try to convince yourself that no, what do you do with your feelings? If you absolutely hate one of your colleagues at work, what do you do with your feelings? Does it allow you to shout at that colleague and insult him or her every day you go to work? Of course not. You get a hold of your feelings and you modify your behavior. So the fact that we love who we love is horrible. It's your starting point. That was your starting point. You love certain artists. Now what do you do with that? And she ends up, oh, we love who we love. I know that. So I thought there was a big problem in that book. And the big problem is that this is a biography of the audience, but it's an audience of one, who is Claire Dederer, and it's an audience of one with a massive conflict of interest. Now, of course, anyone who's going to write a book about that, about the audience, will become the artist for the audience. So for me, Claire Dederer is the artist. But, so that there's inherently a conflict of interest there. But she could have minimized it, but she did not. Because at some point in the book, when she starts feeling guilty for being a bad mother, for being an alcoholic, and because of the fact that she is an alcoholic, that she has been a bad mother for a long time, not just for the few weeks that she spent at the writing retreat, that for this reason, she's working out her guilt into her own book. So by making a biography of monsters, but we love them because we love who we love, she is sort of trying to excuse herself. And by the way, I don't judge her. Alcoholism and addiction is a beast of its own. Perhaps it's your fault when you start the first time you drink, but nobody chooses to be an alcoholic. Nobody chooses to be a drug addict. So it's a little bit down to our choices, but at some point it becomes out of our control. It becomes chemistry, and there's not much we can do about it. It's very difficult to get out of it. And I'm not judging her for that at all. And also, of course, it makes you a bad mother, I suppose, if you put alcohol in front of them, if you drive while you're drunk and you put your children in danger. But then again, I'm not willing to put her on the same level as somebody who has killed someone, as somebody who has raped someone. It's not the same type of monsters. So that's the other thing that I don't like about the book, is that all monsters are put on an equal footing. And I'm going to give you another argument for why we love who we love is an utterly shit conclusion. I was thinking while I was reading this book of a particular case. It happened 20 years ago in France. There was the singer of a very popular rock group called Noir, Désir, and the singer was Bertrand Cantat. And he killed his then girlfriend, Marie Trintignant, who was a very famous actress. She had been in front of the camera since she was a kid. Her parents were part of the cinematic universe in France. To give you an idea of comparison, imagine that Chris Martin from Coldplay had killed Gwyneth Paltrow. So it was that big when it happened in France. And a bit later in the summer, I read a book about that particular case because it has been 20 years. So the book is called, it's just in French, it's not translated in English. It is called Désir, Noir, and the author is Anne-Sophie Jahr. And she's a journalist and she has investigated the case of this singer. So what happened was that both of them, I suppose, had some sort of alcohol and drug issues. They were consuming quite a lot. The relationship was rather recent. Both of them had left partners with whom they had children, and very young children. In the case of Cantat, I think he left his girlfriend, the baby was just a few months old. In the case of Trintignant, I think the baby was like 2 years old, something like that. And they had been together just for a few months, but it was a passionate and intense relation. That's generally the euphemism used for violent and controlling. So Trintignant, the actress, was filming a movie. Her mother was the director, and I think her son was also involved. She had 4 children with 4 different men. The older was 18 years old, and the youngest one was 2 years old. And I think the eldest one was there. Her brother was there too. So it was a bit of a family affair. And the singer Cantat decided to go and visit her. He was not invited. He just invited himself. And then one evening, he just got really drunk and probably high on something. I don't know what. And he beat her and she died. And for a while, the official story was that it was an accident. The first story that came out was that he slapped her and she hit her head on a radiator, and that it was that caused the blow that killed her. The truth is that the autopsy found about 20 bruises, including one that took, this is going to be rather graphic, including one where the frontal bones of the face were broken and were so, the fracture, the blow was so powerful that it damaged the brain behind. And that is what caused her death. So it takes a lot for your face to go back into your brain. And that is what happened. So he hit her about 20 times. And then he saw her collapse on the sofa. And he saw that she would not get up. So he placed her on the bed. And she was resting. And he did not call for help. Several hours later, he called her brother. So that happened, like, let's say at midnight. And he called the brother at 6 o'clock in the morning. And to say, oh, well, your sister's not doing well. I think something happened. So the brother decided to go to the hotel room to see what the heck was going on. And it was a suite, so there was like a bedroom, and then there was a sofa, and then the place with sofas and just a little living room, I guess. So Cantat just talked to the brother and just made him stay in the little living room area and just gave him a drink. He said, no, she's resting, she's resting, she's resting. And then at some point, an hour later, the brother said, I want to see my sister. And he just walked past the singer Cantat, and he went to see her. And he saw the state her sister was in, his sister was in, and he called for some help. And when the ambulance arrived, she was still breathing, but she was brain dead. And basically, she had been brain dead for almost 6 hours. She probably, for her to have had a chance to survive these blows, she would have had to be in the operating room in like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And that just didn't happen. So not only was it not an accident, he did absolutely nothing to help her. He just kept drinking. And his excuse was, well, she hit me too. She was about 5 feet tall. He was about 6 feet tall. She hit him. Really? Did you have to hit back 20 times? So what happened then was that the actor was tried, he was convicted, and he got 8 years. That was in Lithuania, so that the exact equivalent does not necessarily exist, but it's the equivalent somewhat of manslaughter or something like that. He got 8 years. He received permission to serve his prison time in France, and he served 4 years of that, so half the sentence, which is it's rather standard in many countries that if you're behaving correctly, you just serve half your sentence. And then for the next 4 years, he was in probation. While he was in probation, he went back to his previous girlfriend with whom he had a child, and they had another one. And that woman, not very long after the end of his probation, committed suicide. And before just the evening or the minutes, I think, before she committed suicide, she called her parents. Her parents were not home. So she left a message on the answering machine, a very, very long message, in which she was saying her despair at her situation, that I don't know if they were married by now, but that Cantat was beating her regularly, and that she didn't want to say anything before because she didn't want him to go back to jail. She wanted her children to have a father, and she was just putting up with it, thinking, oh, it's just the alcohol, it's just the drugs, and I don't want him to go to jail. And she ended up killing herself. So that's the situation of this singer, who is just a horrible person, because he killed one woman and then he just mistreated another one, just as though nothing had happened. And to this day, I think he still defends the theory that the death of his girlfriend Trintignant was just an accident. He still denies hitting her 20 times. he still has several friends in show business in France, and many of them, not many of them, but a few of them have tried to give him another chance. So he was cast in a play at some point, and he wanted to go back on the stage, this time as an actor. There was an uproar, and then he cancelled. And then he produced another album, and he wanted to play the music on the stage. What is wrong with that, you may think? What is wrong with that is that we have a man who has killed someone, refuses to admit the wrongs that he did, refuses to take a good look at himself, and wants to be put on a stage, literally to be looked up, to be admired by a bunch of fans, to be applauded by a crowd, singing love songs. Because he's still going to claim that he loves Trintignant, that he loved her, perhaps that he doesn't love her anymore, but that he loved her, that he killed her out of love, out of passion. It's horrible. And the conclusion of Dederer, we love who we love. It's shit when it comes to a situation like that. If you love the music of Cantat and of Noir, Désir, I suppose you're allowed to love it. But you're not allowed to go applaud him. You're not allowed to go admire him. That does make you a bad person, I think. Another point that Dederer makes, however, which is excellent, is that the industry forces us to make individual decisions. When the industry refuses to make decisions, the right decisions, the weight of it is on us individually. Which is unfair. It's never going to work. For example, during the pandemic, there was the podcaster Joe Rogan, who said something very, very stupid about vaccination and COVID and things like that. And for a little while, there was an uproar and where a lot of people canceled their Spotify subscription because he had been paid, I don't know how many millions to have his podcast exclusively on Spotify. And there was an uproar and people canceled their subscription. But it should have been Spotify who should have told Joe Rogan, I'm sorry, your excuses are not valid. Saying that, oh, I did my best is not good enough. You gave mediocre information, you did zero research, you supported conspiracy theories. Just, we don't want you on our platform. That should have been the reaction of Spotify. But no, Spotify decided that, no, we're just going to keep the money. Joe Rogan, there's not enough people who are going to cancel that it's going to hurt us financially. So we're just going to leave him there. So that's what happened. And that is absolutely, Dederer is right in saying that leaving these decisions to individual people is never going to have any effect. And it's totally true. And to go back to the situation of Cantat and Noir, Désir, the radios in France never stopped playing his music. They never stopped playing that music. In Canada, I don't know. They were popular, but not as much. I think there may have been less of their music being played. Personally, I was not a fan. I would not be able to recognize any of Noir, Désir's songs. Maybe I've heard them before, I probably have, but I've never bought any of their albums, and I'm not particularly a fan. So it doesn't cost me anything to say, well, don't love their music, don't listen to their music. But there's something totally icky by the blank check that Dederer sort of gives us at the end of the book of saying, well, we love who we love, and there's nothing we can do about it. Yet, perhaps there's nothing you can do about your love of something, but you can do something about that feeling. What do you do with that feeling? Your behavior with that feeling is entirely within your control. So that's the reason why the book drove me nuts. In one sentence, it's the biography of an audience, but it's an audience of one with a conflict of interest. That's my issue with that book. There are several good points, but they are completely obliterated by the conflict of interest of the author, and I don't know if it's conscious on her part, but she is, in a way, disculpating herself by saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about that. She's telling us that we're not allowed not to like her book because we don't like her. Anyway, so it drove me nuts. So that's the book that made me react the most in 2023. See, I did this very, very calmly. No rant, no disheveled yelling at the phone. Good for me. Yeah, in a way, I think perhaps the ranting would have been more interesting, because now I'm talking about this in a calm manner, and I don't think it shows how frustrating I found that book to be. But it was so immensely frustrating because I thought there was several good points, and they were completely cancelled out by the bad points at the end, or the lack of a firm conclusion. Also, there are several things that she did not explore at all. For example, collective responsibility. So in the example that I gave of the French singer, he was part of a group. So if we punish the singer, we sort of punish the entire group. In the case of, what's his name? The conductor of Metropolitan Opera, James Levine. If the radios cancel him, they also cancel several other artists. Perhaps there are several singers who had their best performance under the conductorship of James Levine. And if we cancel James Levine, we also cancel these singers. So what do we do about that? That's not explored at all in the book. She does not explore certain factors. So, for example, the fact that an artist is dead. For me personally, it does make a big difference. If the artist, who is a monster, died 500 years ago, I don't care anymore. At this point, it really doesn't matter. At that point, it's really easy to separate art from artists. Or if we do not necessarily separate art from artists, it's easier to judge. I don't know. For some reason, for me, it feels a lot less icky. And she doesn't really talk about that, whether the artist is alive or not. She also doesn't make any difference between an artist that we see live, for example, the singer on the stage who has killed someone and we're there applauding him, versus an artist that whose work we experience from a distance, for example, the author of a book. There is a very large distance between the author and the reader, physically, and also in time. When the author writes the book, we are not there, which is absolutely not the same with a singer who is on stage singing live. We are just right there with that person. So again, the experience is very different. So that is not also taken into account in the book. So her idea at the beginning that perhaps maybe there could be a formula to tell us what is acceptable and what is not would have to take a whole bunch of factors into account, and she does not examine them at all. So that is also another frustrating point of the book. It's that it starts with a very good premise, in my opinion. You may think that the premise is no good, but I thought the premise was very good, but the realization at the end is just not there at all for me. It drove me bonkers. So I've said that 3 times, 10 times. The book drove me bonkers. So if you've read it, let me know in the comments what you thought of it. If you noticed any of these things, if it's just me inventing things. And I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine.